Hello everyone and welcome back for another edition of the Kickstarter Weekly. Today's video is going to cover games that are funding from December 13th through the 19th. There are only 2 games this video. But before we get to those 2 games, I'm going to first talk about the 3 games that I played in this last week. So the first of the 3 games that I played this last week is Grand Austria Hotel, which I've talked about quite a bunch in previous videos. I've been playing a lot of it lately. I finally was able to play it with my fiance, Kristen. We played the base game and she liked it. I would like to start playing it with some of the expansions, and when I do, I will tell you more about that. For now, though, I'm going to not spend too much time on Grand Austria Hotel just because I don't see any reason to kind of repeat myself and what I've said over the last several weeks. But if this is your first time here, I will just quickly say that Grand Austria Hotel is a medium weight dice placement game where you are getting guests into your cafe through drafting. And then you need to give those guests food and drink that they want. And once you do that, you can place them into your hotel. When you place them into your hotel, you'll be activating the various power abilities on those cards, and those will give you little bonuses and bumps throughout the game. You'll also be placing them in different colored rooms that match the color of their guest card, and as you do that, you'll get bonuses as well. Finally, you have staff cards. You'll start the game with 6 of those. There are ways to get others, generally through the abilities on the guests when you send them to the hotel. And those staff cards, once you play them out, will give you, again, kind of more ongoing abilities. Those staff cards will almost create a little bit of a variable player engine. Some of them will have abilities that you can trigger once a round. Some of them will just kind of have ongoing buffs, and some of them will be endgame scoring. And the 4th kind of staff cards are just one-time abilities. So you'll play that card out into your tableau, and then at any time you can trigger that. Usually it's for resources. It's a really good game. I really like it. I probably have it rated about an 8.5 right now. That may go up as I play more of the expansion content. I don't think it'll go down. I think Grand Austria Hotel is a really good, really solid game that exists at a difficulty level where I think most gamers can enjoy it. So it's a really good game to have in a collection. It's not too difficult to teach. And in my opinion, it's just a very, very solid, involving, fun game. I also played Star Wars Rebellion, and it was the first time I've ever played Star Wars Rebellion, which is kind of amazing because I think right now it's sitting around number 8 on Board Game Geek's top games of all time, so it's very high. Star Wars Rebellion is a 2-player game, so players are going to be going head-to-head. One player plays the Rebels, the other player plays the Imperial side, and basically, the Empire is searching for the Rebels' hidden base. So it's kind of a deduction game in a way. It has something in common with games like Letters from Whitechapel, Whitehall Mystery, and Fury of Dracula. In those games, you're searching for either Jack the Ripper or Dracula, and you're using deduction to kind of scour all these locations and try to find them. Star Wars Rebellion definitely has more going on than those games. Those games are relatively simple, whereas Star Wars Rebellion has a lot of cards that you can play with various leaders. There's combat in the game. Players are producing ships. So there's a lot going on. It's sort of half deduction game and half kind of dudes on a map miniatures skirmish to some degree. I do have to say that this isn't really my game. This isn't the kind of game that I love. So any number score that I give it is probably going to reflect that and be a couple points lower than maybe the ideal audience for this game. I did like it. I also think that it's going to be more rewarding on future plays because there is a lot in the game that, tactically and just iconography-wise, it helps to have more experience with it, especially when you're playing, one-on-one. It helps to have more knowledge of the various leaders on the rebel side and the imperial side, and just kind of a general understanding of the tactics and how they work. I would like to play it again. I played the imperial side in our game, which I think is the easier side to learn. Not necessarily to play, but just to learn, because they are really just trying to find that rebel base and also capture some of the rebel leaders in the process. That makes it a little easier, because if you capture those leaders, then the rebel side has less leaders to use during their turn. And using leaders is how you initiate missions and move ships around the board, and also oppose and contest the other player when they're doing things. So the more leaders you have, the better. If you get a leader captured, it's not good. Whereas the rebel side is trying to complete missions that will score them victory points. There's kind of a round marker, and that's going to go up, and once the round marker and the rebels' victory point marker meet, the game is going to end. And if the Empire has not found the rebel base or captured it by that time, then the rebels win. So the rebels are trying to complete these missions. As they do that, their marker is going to head down to meet that round marker. So even if the rebels never complete any missions, the round marker will eventually get to them and end the game. But the more missions that the rebels complete, the quicker that victory point marker of theirs is going to descend down to meet the round marker, the quicker the game is going to be over. We actually did not finish our game. We played it for several hours. It was, I think, a more contentious game than most. Even though it was my first time, I think I played fairly well, enough that my friend Kevin, who was playing the rebels, couldn't just skate to an early victory. And then we had a third friend coming over to join us later in the night, and it was at such a standstill that we just decided to call the game. So there was no victor in our game, but I did get to play the game. I got to experience it. I got to see how it works. I would like to play it again. I'd like to play it from the rebel side, which I think will be a little bit more interesting, playing the various missions that they're trying to complete and just getting to play the rebel leaders. And it's a game that I would play probably several more times, but it's not really in my sweet spot. I'm not a huge fan of those kinds of I don't want to call them hidden movement games, because there isn't necessarily movement, but deduction games where you're trying to find some hidden entity. And the Star Wars thing for me, I like Star Wars. I grew up with Star Wars. I really like Star Wars Imperial Assault, which is basically taking the Descent game and bringing it over to Star Wars. So it's kind of a dungeon crawler with a campaign. And I think if I was going to buy a Star Wars themed game, I'd probably go for that one first. The danger of that is that it's a campaign game. There's a million expansions, and it can get very expensive and take up a lot of space. So for me, I think, I'd be happy to play a Rebellion again. I'll enjoy it when I do. I think the more that I play it, the better sense I'll get of the tactics and the strategies, and that way it'll be more fun and it'll be more rewarding. But I just don't think that this is kind of my game. So it's not a game that I ever plan on purchasing. And, if I never played it again, I'd be okay with that. If I played it a couple more times, I'd probably be fine just to call it a day. So I think for me, the game is probably going to fall into the 7.5 kind of range. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I'd be happy to play it again. And I think it has good choices that are made. So games that, for me, that are in the 8 range and above are games that I'm really excited about, and I'd kind of be happy to play whenever. If it was between that and many other games that are in that 8 and above range, I'd probably choose those other games. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. Didn't love it. Would play it again. And it kind of just slides in that range of good games that I enjoy, and I don't really need to play it again, but if I do, I know I will like it. The last game that I played this period was Viscounts of the West Kingdom. We started that game a little later in the evening. A friend kind of joined us, and I hadn't really been able to prepare the teach as well as I would have liked, so it was a little rougher around the edges, and there was kind of a learning curve, I think, as we all went through the first couple turns of the game. Some of the iconography isn't really listed in the rule book, some of the terminology, so there's a little back and forth for us figuring things out. Once we finally kind of got into a groove with it, I really did enjoy the game. I think I probably put this one around maybe an 8.0. Now, the board is essentially a big rondel, and players are going to have some cards they're going to be playing into a player board. The cards themselves may have various abilities. Some of those abilities may trigger when they fall off the player board as you kind of rotate cards through, which you'll be doing each turn. Some of the cards have abilities that trigger when you put them on the board, and then some of them just kind of have ongoing abilities that will be available or buffing your actions while they are on your board. So that's kind of happening, the situation with the player board. And then players have their Viscount, which is a big wooden piece, kind of a rider on a horse. And you're going to be going around this giant rondel of a board and kind of doing different sorts of actions. If you end up on the outer ring of the board, you'll be taking one of two actions during your turn. You'll either be constructing a building, and the more buildings you put out, the more kind of bonus abilities you'll trigger. You'll be scoring endgame victory points for those buildings as set collection points. The other thing you can do on that outer ring of the board is to basically get resources or various abilities that use these blue money bag pouch icons. So you're essentially making a purchase when you use them. If you're on the inside of the board, you have two different actions that you can choose from. One of them is to place some of your workers on this three-tiered castle in the middle of the board. And the more workers you put on that space, the more they'll push each other up towards the top of the castle and around to the sides. And there'll be victory point scoring for those workers' placements at the end of the game, as well as a 5-point bump for either someone who's on top of the castle or the player that has the most workers on top of the castle. The second thing that you can do when you're on that inside circle of the board is to transcribe manuscripts, which are these tiles that are kind of all around the board. And when you transcribe those manuscripts, they're going to give you usually some kind of bonus. Some of them will have endgame scoring abilities, and some of those endgame scoring abilities can be very powerful because they will trigger off of various icons on your cards. And if you have a lot of cards by the end of the game, it's a really good source of victory points. There's also a set collection scoring for those manuscripts. So there are 4 different colors of manuscripts. And every time you get a set of all 4 colors, you'll score 16 points. Smaller numbers of manuscripts in sets score smaller numbers of points. So I think it's like 1, 4, 9, and 16 for every set that you have of 1, 2, 3, or 4 manuscripts of different colors. Also, if you get 3 manuscripts of the same color, you'll be able to grab a cleric bonus card that will give you also an ongoing ability as well as some endgame victory points. So this is one of those games where you're going to kind of have to choose what you want to do in the game. So there are maybe 4 or 5 different ways to score big chunks of victory points, but you can't do all of them to the max. So you kind of have to figure out whether you want to do a little bit of everything or go heavy into one thing. Now, I've only played the game once, so I don't know whether it's better to go heavy into one thing or do a little bit of everything, but that's something that I plan to figure out as I play the game more in the future. There's also a lot of actions going on with cards, so you're going to start every turn with 3 cards in your hand to start, unless you increase that card hand limit later. You will kind of move your cards on your player board. The one that falls off, if that has a fall off ability, you'll gain that. The one that you place on, if it has an instant ability, you'll gain that. So you'll do that. Then you'll move your Viscount around the board based on the silver cost of the card you just placed on your player board. That will give you your movement points for the round. You can also boost those movement points by paying additional silver. And then you'll do one of those 4 actions that I described already. Either constructing a building, getting some goods, placing some workers on the castle tower, or transcribing manuscripts. Then you'll be able to purchase the card on the board where you ended up. So there are 5 different stacks of cards on the board, and you'll always have the opportunity to purchase the card that is near the location where you completed your movement. So you'll do that. There's also an additional mechanic where you have these kind of 2 markers for virtue and vice, and if they have during this turn hit each other, You will process that collision. You'll get some bonus things. Other players may get some penalties. It kind of all depends where on that combined track they collided. And then at the very end of your turn, you'll draw up to your hand limit. So players kind of just go around clockwise doing that over and over until they trigger the end of the game. There is a sort of interesting situation where you're going to have deeds and debts, and players will be taking both of those during the game. Debts immediately get you a -2 victory points, but there'll be actions around the game where you can flip those debts over. And if you flip it over, it'll go from being -2 victory points to 0, plus you'll get a resource of your choice. There's also deeds, which when you get a deed, it's worth 1 victory point, and if you flip that deed over, it will be worth 3. So you kind of have these two warring piles of debts and deeds. Whichever pile extinguishes first, the other pile will get additional endgame scoring. So whatever player has the most of the other thing flipped will get endgame points, and then the second most player a little less, and the third most player a little bit less. So there's a bunch of kind of mechanics going on here. They all work really nicely together. This is only the second of the West Kingdom games that I've played. So the first one that I played was Architects of the West Kingdom. I didn't really love that one so much because I didn't like the mechanism where you kind of sent people's workers to jail and then had to get your workers back. I liked the game okay. It just wasn't my favorite mechanism, so it kind of put it on the lower end of the Garphill games. This one I would say I liked more, but I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. I think this one's going to kind of fall into maybe a solid 8 for me. So now I'm curious to play Paladins, which I do own, because I have a feeling that's going to be my favorite of the 3 games in this trilogy. I do plan on playing Viscounts of the West Kingdom again with Kristen at some point. I'd like to play it at a 2-player count and just get a little bit more experience with the game before I give it a grade. It is a 2020 game, which means I'm not planning on doing a first impressions video for it, but I kind of want to figure out where I think my score is solidly going to land so that I can include it with my best games of 2020. And that will be coming out probably in the first month or two of 2022. So I'll be doing a series of videos on my top games from 2020. Then I'll launch into a bigger series of my favorite games of all time. I'm not sure what the number on that is going to be, maybe 200, 250, 300. My friend Ryan's going to join me for maybe the top 50 of those games. So the top 50 of our favorite games of all time we'll do together. And then once I'm through that series, I will do my top 2021 games. So that last series, the 2021 games, probably won't premiere until maybe second quarter of 2022. So in summation here, I'd probably say that I love Grand Austria Hotel, I really like Viscounts, and Star Wars Outer Rim, I can kind of take or leave. But if I'm in the mood for a Star Wars themed game that kind of has tactics, a little bit like maybe Twilight Imperium, but it's more a 2-player head-to-head game, it's a good game, and certainly it's a well-loved game. So if you like Star Wars games, if you're looking for a 2-player theme game, and you kind of like that deduction and trying to find somebody, it's a really good game, and you probably will like it more than I do. Okay, so let's talk about the 2 currently running Kickstarter campaigns. The first is for Pathfinder Arena, and this game is going to complete its funding on Monday, December 13th. Now, they started with a minimum required funding goal of $56,000. They're currently sitting around $132,000 as I film this, which is about 2.5 times that initial minimum required funding goal. Pathfinder Arena is going to play 2 to 4 players. Games should last about 60 to 80 minutes. It looks like it's going to be a medium-heavy game, and we're going to set the risk on this one at high. And the reason is, while the publisher has published some games before, this is their very first Kickstarter campaign. So they're doing this for the first time. Now, this game is going to be taking its theme from Pathfinder RPG's Age of Lost Omens, It's sort of a miniature skirmish battle to some degree, but it's also got action points, it's got deck construction, and then it's got this central tile puzzle where you're going to be using slide push mechanisms. I think so much so that that is kind of the main mechanism of the game. So think of it as if you're playing Pathfinder with miniatures. It's skirmishy, but it's not just a skirmish game. There is this kind of abstract puzzle going on with this slide push and kind of moving tiles around. So when you play this game, you'll definitely want to be splitting your focus between the miniature skirmish side of it and this kind of abstract tile push-pull puzzle. So there are 3 different designers on Pathfinder Arena, and all 3 of them, it appears this is their first published game. They are Flavio Anzide, Giorgio Serafini, and Roberto Topuzzi. The artist on Pathfinder Arena is Wayne Reynolds, who's previously worked on Dungeons & Dragons Castle Ravenloft, Dungeon Twister, and Magic the Gathering. And the publisher is Giochi Uniti. They've previously published Letters from Whitechapel, Kingsburg, and Whitehall Mystery. Now there are 6 different pledge levels we're going to talk about today, as well as a bunch of add-ons. So the first 2 pledge levels are for people who only want the standees version of the game. For $46, the basic pledge, you're going to essentially get the core box version of the game with applicable stretch goals, and it's the standees version. For $97, you can get the basic Masters pledge that's going to add on 4 different expansions to the standees core set. That's going to be the Heroes expansion, the Monster and Dragon expansion, which is actually 2 different expansions in the miniatures version, but in the standees version they combine that into one, as well as the Age of Ashes expansion, and then the Trap Tiles expansion. Now the Trap Tiles are the same whether you're getting them for the standees version or for the miniatures version. They're just cardboard tiles that are different from what's in the game. They're going to have traps on them, so it's going to give you more variability. From there, we kind of move on to the miniature pledges. So for $113, you can pledge the Adventurer pledge, and that's going to get you the Pathfinder Arena core set. That's what they're calling it, and that is the core set with the miniatures. Now the next pledge level is miniatures only, so there's no game in this. This is just for somebody who wants just the miniatures, maybe to put on their shelf or to use for other things. So that pledge level is $142. It's called the Miniatures Pledge, and it's going to get you the Pathfinder Arena all-in miniatures. And again, it's only the miniatures, no game. For $159, which is the Champion Pledge, you're going to start with that $139 Adventure Pledge with the Pathfinder Arena core set, and you're going to add 3 expansions onto it. So one of them is the Trap Tiles. Again, that's kind of the same no matter how you get it. And then there's the Heroes expansion and the Monster expansion, and both of those are the Miniatures expansion. For $187, which is the Master Pledge, you're going to add on 2 more expansions, the Age of Ashes expansion and the Dragon expansion. And again, both of those will be the Miniatures version. So that pledge level is essentially the all-in Miniatures game. Now, if for some reason you kind of want to just pick and choose what expansions that you want and kind of add them on piecemeal, almost everything is available as an add-on. So if you want the standees expansions as add-ons only, the Heroes expansion will cost $11. The Age of Ashes standee expansion will cost $17, and then the combined Monster and Dragon standees expansion will also be $17. The Trap Tiles, as we said, that's going to be the same whether you're doing miniatures or standees. So if you're buying that as an add-on, that also is $17. Now, as for the miniatures expansions, if you're doing those as add-ons, the Age of Ashes expansion is $40. The Heroes expansion is $23. The Monsters expansion is $34. And the Dragon expansion is also $23. Finally, if you wanted to kind of just add on an additional all-in miniatures pledge, no game, you can also do that as an add-on, and that is $141. I've gotten in the habit of not including shipping totals in these entries because it's different for every country. So there's kind of no standard. Even in the United States, there's a different shipping price for the continental United States versus Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. But I think just to kind of throw out shipping numbers in general so you guys have a reference point and you know if shipping for a certain campaign is really high compared to other campaigns. I'm just going to start including one shipping number, which is going to be the kind of all-in shipping price for the continental United States. Or if they only list one shipping price, I'll be listing that one for the continental United States. So that shipping figure for Pathfinder Arena is $40. So if you're in the continental United States, no matter what you're ordering, they're estimating the shipping cost is going to be $40. And finally, GOG Unity is planning on delivering Pathfinder Arena in November of 2022. The second entry is Weather Machine, and Weather Machine is going to be funding on Saturday, December 18th. Now, they had a minimum required funding goal of $150,000. They're currently sitting around $989,000, which is about 6.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Weather Machine is a game for 1 to 4 players. It's going to play in about 60 to 150 minutes. It's definitely of the heavy complexity, and the risk level on this one we're going to set at low. Now, this is sort of a typical Vital Lacerda game. It's going to use action points, tile placement, and worker placement. And thematically in this game, there's this eccentric professor who's trying to create a weather machine to solve the world's problems. The problem is that in trying to invent this machine, he's doing a lot of experiments, and those experiments are creating problems. So the players who are his assistants are going to constantly be doing things like trying to get funding or fixing the various problems, doing research, things like that. And from everything that I've seen, this game looks like it's going to be right up there with the best of Vital Lacerda's designs. And Vital Lacerda is my favorite designer, so that's really saying something. Vital Lacerda, the designer here, has previously designed such games as The Gallerist, Kanban EV, Lisboa, On Mars, and Venus Deluxe Edition. And the artist on this game is Ian O'Toole, who is sort of a constant collaborator with Vital Lacerda, so much so that most of their top games are the same. The one lone exception is Age of Steam. So Ian O'Toole's top 5 games on BGG include Age of Steam, The Gallerist, Lisboa, On Mars, and Venus Deluxe Edition. And finally, this game is being published by Eagle Gryphon Games, and their 5 highest rated games on BGG are Brass Lancashire, The Gallerist, On Mars, Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization, and Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. Now, there's really only one pledge level here on this one, although you will need to pay attention if you decide to pledge this because there are different pledges for different languages. But they're all going to be $129. They're called Weather Machine, and they're going to include the game, any stretch goals, and a solo mode by David Turksey. There is one other pledge level, which almost doesn't bear mentioning, but it is $249. It's called the Express Copy, and that's going to just get you the same copy of the game, just a little bit sooner. It's going to ship a little bit sooner, and you're going to pay $120 for that, which is almost the price of the game. You will also get a little hand-signed numbered decal sticker that you can put on your box. So that is a pledge that exists. I probably would not recommend it to anyone. Even people who are huge Vital Lacerda fans like me, there's no reason to pay double just to get a little sticker with a signature and a number on it, in my opinion. But if you want it, I have no problem with people giving more money to Vital Lacerda and Ian O'Toole and Eagle Gryphon Games because they make amazing games and I'd like them to keep producing more games. So there are a couple small add-ons here. For $19, you can get metal machine parts, and that's going to replace some of the components of the game, which are going to be more, cardboard tiles. So if you want to upgrade that, $19 for the metal machine parts. There's also a metal noble prize. I believe that's kind of handed out in the game as a reward. If you want to get a metal version of that, that's going to be $5. So the two things together will be $24. If you want to throw a little extra money at Eagle Gryphon Games and Vital and Ian O'Toole, I think you're probably better off just getting those upgraded parts and spending $24 on that than getting the numbered stickered version for $120 extra. Now, the shipping number I'm going to throw out for this campaign, which again is going to be in terms of US dollars, it's the only number that they've given us because really the pledges that we're looking at are those $129 pledges. Even the more expensive one is going to be shipping the same weight box. It's going to be the same except for that decal. So that number is $22. And then just as with Pathfinder Arena, Eagle Gryphon Games is planning on delivering Weather Machine in November of 2022. So that wraps the currently running Kickstarters. Normally I would talk about what game I pledged from the previous period, but there are only 2 games that I highlighted last week, and neither one of them were games that I personally chose to pledge. So nothing to talk about this week in the pledge section. However, I do have 10 new arrivals to talk about, although 6 of them are kind of all part of one package. So the first of these 2 games are games that I ordered because TMG sadly is going out of business and they've been doing liquidation sales and having some pretty good prices on things. So I picked up At the Gates of Loyang as part of that sale. It's an earlier Uwe Rosenberg game. I was a little worried that it might go out of print. Hopefully I didn't make a huge mistake because another publisher could come along and pick up the rights and put out a new, better version of it. And I just kind of purchased the older version. But I would like to play the game. I'd like to have it in my collection. And this may be the last chance to do that for a while if another publisher doesn't pick up those rights really quickly. I also got Crusaders Thy Will Be Done Deluxified. That's a game that I missed the Kickstarter. I'm not sure I was really doing Kickstarters so much when that game was up, and I've heard really good things about it, but because there's a Deluxified version out there, I wanted to get that one. And I think that's been kind of hard to find until recently, until this liquidation sale. And now they've kind of released the rest of their inventory that they'd been holding, I think, more for conventions and kind of sales off their website and things. So I was able to pay a pretty good price and get that Crusaders Deluxified version. I'm actually really excited about that, and I'd like to get that one to the table soon because it looks really cool to me. The problem there is I just have so many other games I have to get played for my 2020 and 2021 lists that I don't think Crusaders is going to get to the table until I'm past that, which will be probably mid-2022. I also picked up Descent Legends of the Dark on a huge kind of holiday Black Friday sale. I was able to get it for less than $100 at about 60% off. So I was really excited for that price, and it's a game I'd kind of been waffling on. I think it's a game I'd eventually like to play on the Twitch channel once we launch that in 2022. So I picked it up. The price was right. I don't see it probably going down that low again for a while. And then the last group of 6 games, which kind of all came together, they're kind of all part of one thing, was Valeria Card Kingdoms, which is the original base game. And I pledged that through the campaign for Valeria Card Kingdoms Darksworn. So that was actually the campaign that I backed. And what that does is it expands the capability to play Valeria Card Kingdoms with up to 6 players and to play it cooperatively. And I am a huge fan of any kind of like cooperative dungeon crawler games, even or especially when they include kind of deck construction or deck building mechanics or just kind of card heavy mechanics. So I looked at Valeria Card Kingdoms in the past. I'd thought about getting it, but when they came out with this new expansion that adds in kind of cooperative play, that was definitely my moment to jump on board. I also picked up the Crimson Seas Kickstarter edition through that campaign, and then I picked up 3 things that had sort of gone out of print that they reprinted. And so with me backing this, I wanted the original base game, I wanted Darksworn, and then I added on a few things that had been out of print for a while that I knew I could get right now. And I suppose if I really like this, I can always add on more expansions and things later. But the other stuff that's out there isn't kind of as hard to find as these. So these are the things that were out of print, and they reprinted them as a part of this campaign. So that included expansion pack number 1, Kingsguard, expansion pack number 2, Undead Samurai, and then the Flames and Frost expansion. So all 6 of those items were Valeria Card Kingdoms items, and they all came as a part of that Darksworn campaign. Finally, let's talk very briefly about what's coming. And sadly, I've just been so busy over the last few weeks with a lot of things going on. Some of it has actually been getting to play more games than usual with friends who were kind of in town for small periods of time. That happened again this week. I have a friend, his name is Kevin, and he now, starting during the pandemic, has kind of been commuting back and forth to Chicago. He and his wife kind of temporarily moved out there, but he still works out here, so he's been going back and forth. So he was the one who came over and we played Star Wars Outer Rim and we played Viscounts of the West Kingdom. And then I'm having another friend come over tomorrow. We're going to be playing some games. Hopefully I'll be getting to Nidavellir, but I know we're going to be playing Altar Quest, and we may try to get in Wasteland Express delivery service. But what that means is, kind of with all this game playing, which is great, and with kind of holiday stuff and things going on, I just haven't had too much time to shoot and edit videos beyond the Kickstarter weeklies and the Game of the Month videos. So I'm still planning on getting out those first impressions videos. I think next week I kind of won't have really as much game playing going on, so I will hopefully be able to start pumping out these first impressions videos. I also think I'm probably going to be trying to get played, when I do play games, some of my remaining games from 2020. I'm going to say right now, I have 17 games left to play from 2020. And I'm going to put this number up every Kickstarter weekly, and we're going to watch it get smaller. And when that number gets down to 0, that's when I'll start working on the probably top 30 games of 2020. When that series ends, I'll go into my top 250 or 30 games of all time. And then when that series ends, I'll go into my top 25 or 30 games from 2021. But I think for right now, I'm going to focus on getting those remaining 2020 games played, which means I won't be playing too many more games where I'll be doing a first impressions video. So right now, while I'm kind of getting through this backlog of 2020 games, I'll hopefully be catching up with the remaining kind of first impressions videos in the queue. And by the time I kind of finish with those 2020 games and catch up and get those played, those first impressions videos should be done, and I can start to catch up on some 2021 games and get first impressions videos out for those. So I will say that next week I am planning on getting another Kickstarter weekly video out, my November Game of the Month video, and then hopefully, if I have the time, these 4 first impressions videos. So we've got Brew, Dinosaur World, Embarcadero, and Kemet Blood and Sand. Now, if all goes to plan, that means the following week I will be doing these first impressions videos: Role Player Adventures, Tsukiyumi Full Moon Down, and Unsettled. And if I have time for a 4th one that week, maybe Anno 1800. And I won't be giving you any more games as a part of that first impressions list until we get through this 7 or 8. But hopefully I'll get through at least 2 to 4 of that first group next week. Finally, I'd like to thank you very much for spending some time with me, listening to me talk about games. Hopefully I helped you out making a decision with either Pathfinder Arena or Weather Machine. If you'd like to, you can kind of guess down in the comments about which of those 2 games I might possibly back. 1, both, I don't know. Let me know what you think. And then next week I will reveal if I backed either of those games. Please don't forget to like the video, and if you want to keep watching my content and enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe as well. Have a great holiday season, play lots of fantastic games, and I will see you very soon with more videos this coming week. Take care. You're awesome.